exactly the cost we are talking about is the cost transferable to Mwananchi at that particular point in time. Like the cost of power. For instance, if we decide, for instance, to pay all the IPPs today, and within 1 month, then they will compute it, all of it, then it is included in our power bills. And then
divided by a shorter duration, so the figure
the price will
pass on to the Mwananchi will be higher.
The question will be how much can they handle at a given short period of time.
Fully guided.
But on the other hand, if we say that the luxuries that they have been enjoying beyond what the actual capacity charge is and the cost of investment is, if we time that, then we end up paying within a shorter period of time, because we are in agreement that when you look at thermal power plants, the negotiated capacity charge and all that ends up being way beyond what they can call the cost of that equipment or investment. So if we look at and time those excesses, then without stretching the Kenyans, we still end up paying within a shorter period of time. So I want to give you 2 minutes to summarize, and 1 minute.
Chair, before he summarizes, because we are talking about
yes, please.
The cost of electricity. I think we shouldn't dwell on one way of maybe trying to work on how we can reduce the cost of electricity, because LELEC are able to do connection, including dropping, but they don't meter. Then, as much as they were there to serve that purpose, then it takes a year or so before the connectivity is done. Why don't you, PS, allow LELEC to also do metering, rather than, because there is no need of dropping and not metering, and this hence leads to illegal connectivity, whereby we also lose revenue, which we are in need of.
We should ask ourselves, what are the three factors that will then determine the cost? One, I think as a country, we cannot wait, and that's the reason why we're pleading with this Honorable House to raise the moratorium, because the most expensive power is no power at all. So if demand is growing and we are not signing up generation projects, then we are likely to fall into a risk of load shedding. What we should then be doing is to ensure that the capex that is incurred, and I think this is some of the challenge that we have, Chair and members, is that we're not comparing like for like. We are comparing capex of a wind project that was constructed 10 years ago or 15 years ago to the cost of a wind project that is intended to be installed in 2025. And from our submission, you can see the evolution of the dropping of the cost of that technology from 2010 to 2022, which we have demonstrated in our presentation. The cost where we should safeguard is to ensure that the cost on the time that you're getting into this transaction, because these are project finance transactions, is that this is the right cost on the year of implementation. So the challenge has been a lag where you sign a project today, but then the EPC contract is signed 5 years later. And in those 5 years, of course, then the cost of technology has come down. But through the process that the ministry is initiating, that you are able to sign a project today, and you're able to get to the ground and construct the project tomorrow. That one brings certainty from an investor standpoint, and two, ensures that the capex that you've signed up on the EPC is the correct one, so that then we are not comparing apple to orange when it comes to the capex. That is one factor. The second factor is the issue of the cost of debt, which is also driven by macroeconomic conditions. If the sovereign is borrowing at 10%, the question, Chair, as you were saying earlier on, is the regulator is expecting the IPP to borrow at 6.99%, SOFR plus a margin of 3%. And the issues of country risk, and honorable members are well aware of the issues of our country rating, which are well beyond my mandate. The third issue is what is the return that this investor should be able to get in terms of the return of the equity. And equity is more expensive than debt. So those are the issues that we need to think about even as we have this conversation of IPPs. And I want to close my submission on this matter, is that on the issue of the moratorium, we really, from a regulator standpoint, for our first primary issue is security of supply. The average generation cost of all technologies today, as of yesterday, was 10 shillings per kilowatt hour. So we should be asking ourselves, any project that we onboard should be below the average generation cost, because it will ultimately reduce our cost of power, Chair. On the other matter, Chair, you've raised on net metering, I wish to report to this House that as a regulator, we have, with the support of the Cabinet Secretary, the CS has assented to the net metering regulation, which will allow for prosumers, where we're able to install rooftop solar as Kenyans, be able to sell to the grid, and be able to pick it up when we require it. There is one rate limiting factor in that regulation that we are talking to, is the issue of the grid, the resilience of the grid to be able to take power off consumers and be able to take it back because of the realities of our aging infrastructure. The history that you've seen, for instance, there was where this actually started from prosumers. There was a big issue in California. There was a big proliferation of rooftop solars, and it eventually collapsed the grid in California. And I think that is where we are coming from as a regulator, even with the regulation.
In what sense?
Yeah.
Collapsed in what sense?
No, the grid shut itself down because of too much variable renewable energies being inputted into the system at the same time, over and above what was being generated by the power plants. But we have been able to address this in the regulation, because this is a regulation in transition. We have capped it at 100 megawatts as the regulator for net metering, so that in that recognition that we do not want to have a proliferation of net metering. No, 100 megawatts. 100 megawatts, because recognize we have a system of 3,000 megawatts installed. We capped it 100 megawatts to start with. But this, Chair, again, is separate to the conversation that on the other statement that you made.
100 is small. Why 100?
It's in recognition of our system. Our installed capacity is slightly over 3,000 megawatts.
So that gives us what percent?
That would be about 3 to 4%, 3.3%.
Then, okay, how did you decide on the percentage?
Well, based on our installed capacity, and also based on
No, I thought you said it's based on the grid itself.
Yes, there are two factors, Chair. One is the ability of the grid to be able to uptake that power, and we recognize that we have an aged infrastructure, particularly in distribution. Because on net metering, you'll be connecting at distribution lines. This is from the homes into the grid.
But let us envisage a situation where it's a take and pay. And therefore, if it's take and pay, then you cannot limit us to 100 megawatts when you are also telling us to lift the moratorium because you need more power, yet there are people who can provide the power at no conditions.
I'm sure, Chair, this is one of the things that you saw in South Africa. South Africa now have increased. The Energy Act talks to anything above 1 megawatt as passed by this House requires our regulatory approval. Because of the challenges of load shedding in South Africa and because of the size of their system, because, Chair, you've asked why this number of 100. Their system is over 50,000 megawatts. They do not require to come to the regulator in their country for a license if it is anything below 100 megawatts. It's called now registration. All you need to just to register. Because there are two elements here, Chair. There's the technical element in terms of the ability of the grid to be able to take. And again, as I've said, we're in a transition from a single buyer, which is a utility, where government also has committed financial obligations to it. When you have shift of customers, we need to be able to balance, because also the law requires us to ensure that the utility remains a going concern. So we have to strike the right balance through this transition phase. But I do take the point, Chair, and we'll continue
When
to work
are we likely to see the first of this net metering? It's a subject I'm very interested in.
We are engaging with the utility and the ministry in terms of operationalize this, but the regulation is already in place as approved by us by the regulator. Obviously, you would know that there probably would be resistance in some quarters, but we have already gazetted as a regulation as the regulator, and the ministry is supporting us to actually actualize it with the utility.
I know this is a subject that will not be encouraged by many people out there. There will be resistance, and we will not consider backing down on this particular area. We need to discuss that roadmap. Mawada was asking, I asked a question of the when. That when has not been answered. Actually, the response was resistance to the question of the when. So, but I agree with your honesty, Bwana Kipto. We need to start discussing the roadmap to this net metering as soon as from next week, part 1.
More radio, 88.2 FM. We are in charge.